While you're getting seated and before we start this panel on education and job quality, I have to remind you that you have this possibility to participate in each session and ask questions through Weassembly, this app. So I'll read you the paper. First, connect to the OECD hotspot with your smartphone. When you are connected, go to the website app.weassembly.com and use the keyword OECD Blue to access the interactive platform. You can post messages and answer the polls. I think you've been doing this since the morning, so you probably know better than I do what to do. And your participation matters. And I'll have your questions on this tablet, and we'll try to take as many remarks as possible. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm Sophie Fay. I'm the editor of the business section of l'Obs. We've just changed the name of the magazine. It used to be called Le Nouvel Observateur, and it's the French leading news magazine. I'm very thrilled to moderate this panel because, with the PISA ranking, the PISA study, OECD has really made a difference on education, and I don't know many governments in the world who are not sensitive to this study and who have not engaged reforms to answer to what PISA has demonstrated. So it's very interesting to be here at the OECD and talking on this education subject. And the other thing I'm really happy with is the panel. We have a really fantastic diversity of panelists, and from Czechoslovakia to Korea, we have two former Minister of Education to tell us their experience, representatives of trade unions, entrepreneur, author of bestsellers. So we'll have a very interesting time. And the other thing that is really nice, I think, is the problematic chosen by the OECD for this panel, which is one life, 20 careers. How can we better educate the children, the young people, so that they are ready to have 20 jobs in one lifetime? And what kind of education could prepare us to such a world? And I think it's something we all have in mind for our children. So it's going to be very interesting to listen to the debate among our speakers. First of all, I would like to give the floor to Joo-Ho Lee, who is now working at KDI School of Public Policy and Management in Korea. But before that, he was a teacher, an academic. He's been discovered by a strong paper on labor market and education, and thanks to this paper, he was dragged into politics, became a member of parliament, and then a minister of education, science and technology for 2 years in Korea in 2010 and between 2000 and 2012. And he did many reforms. He had the courage to shut 6 universities, when he thought the level was not good enough. He also reformed vocational education. He created those Meister School to make vocational education more attractive to young people. He worked very closely with businesses to do that, and he also developed something very courageous in Korea. He developed a new way to select students based on knowledge tests. Usually it's based on knowledge tests, but what he developed is a method based on interviews and a personality, which created a huge controversy in his country. So based on that experience, Hujo, what do you think today would be the priorities for the education system to prepare young people for this world where they might have 20 jobs in a lifetime?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sophia, for your kind introduction. I'd like to emphasize the big contrast between education and technology that we are facing. The digital revolution has made it possible for almost all students to be connected to the world, everywhere, anyone, anything. But in most countries, education is still kept in the closed system. So I think the opening up education is really important strategy. And as a Minister of Science, Education, Science and Technology in Korea, I really emphasize the importance of opening up education, and with some success and some failures that I really want to share for this forum. And I think in many countries, education system is closed compared to other society, but Korea has the most serious problem in that area. So first, we try to open up education to the industry and also to new players and to foreign countries and parents and the ministry other than education ministries. So we try really hard to open education up. So first, to the opening up to the industry, as you mentioned, we tried to revitalize vocational high schools through so-called MICE high school initiatives. And we actually turned around most failing vocational high schools into really successful vocational schools through opening up strategy. For example, we recruited for the principal of automobile MICE high school in Busan for the former CEO of Renault Samsung, for example. And another example is that we attracted the former CEO of Hynix to become a principal of semiconductor MICE high schools. In that way, we try to really open up our vocational high schools to the needs of industry. So that's the most important part of opening up strategy. And second, we try to open up education to new players, so-called new players. We have new private institutions with new education technologies. We have college students who have real passion for teaching secondary school students. We have social entrepreneurs who are really enthusiastic in changing education. And we opened up education for the role of new players that especially for after class, the after school classes, where we don't require licensed teachers to teach. So we really welcome new players to take part in the changing education. Thirdly, education was opened up to allow more active participation from parents. So we introduced a school deliberation committee in 1995, and we actually put more roles for that deliberation committee. For example, we allow that committee to play more active role in teacher evaluation and also open recruitment of principals, and even selecting different programs for after school classes. So through this active role of school deliberation committee, parents can play more active role. And fourthly, education was opened more actively to foreign countries. Through initiative of world-class universities, we invited more than 340 erudite foreign scholars to domestic campuses in Korea. And also, in addition, through the initiative of Institute for Basic Science, we attracted top-notch scientists from all over the world. So to increase the quality of higher education, we really try hard to open up our higher education system. And finally, we approach the whole of government approach when concerning the education reform, meaning that education policies are not just carried solely by the Ministry of Education, but through cooperation with other related ministries. And government as a whole put a really high priority on education reforms. So for the past 5 years, when we struggled really hard to open up the economy, open up the education. I think we have made some success, but still there is a very far way to go to open more widely our education. And last thing I want to emphasize here is that opening up strategy is important, but probably they should be combined. That strategy should be combined with the strategy emphasizing the role of teachers to get at the same time. Because from the benefit of hindsight, I realized that the Korean policymakers have focused excessively on institutional changes through a top-down approach, while paying less attention to actual changes in the classroom, where teachers are really the center of educational changes. So maybe empowering more on teachers to search for new pedagogies, for example, or rekindling the passion of teachers. That kind of strategy should be also, I think, really in need for Korea and for other countries. So thank you for your attention, and I really like to share a Korean policy experience with the OECD Forum participants.
Thank you very much, Hoo-jo. I gave the floor to Hoo-jo Lee before giving it to Miroslava Kopitsova, doing, well, something wrong with the etiquette. But, I wanted to sort of honor Korea for its high rank in PISA. So thank you, Hoo-jo. Mirka, Hoo-jo has stressed a lot about how opening the educational system could help have a better preparation of students. You've been twice Minister of Education in the Czech Republic. You've been, for 8 years, manager of the research system. You're now head of the National Training Fund, which is not a fund, but an agency with specialists that evaluate, analyze the education, management of research, employment strategies. You work a lot with the European countries and European Commission. What's your view and what should be done to enable the students to be ready for this new kind of job career?
Thank you very much for your two kind words, Sophie. First of all, I'd like to stress that we are facing completely new conditions. Until now, we rather make a better quality of our education system, and we try to have better performance, more highly qualified young people, etc. But we've heard this morning that additional to that, we are facing very complicated conditions where our kids and future generations will have to live well. At least we wish for them to live well. And the question is, what can the education do for that? How we can help them to be ready for this really difficult world. The world which could we see until now was, for instance, in Europe. We expect that until 2020 we will create about 7.5 million new jobs, mostly with high evaluate, high qualified jobs. There will be availability about 80 million jobs altogether because of pensions, etc. But we can't see too far forward, and the question is what we can do in education. Because if you talk to people in companies, they already now say that they are short of really well-qualified human resources. They say that they need more constructors and, people for technologies, for science, which is the age which is really strong and which can help us solve all the difficulties and challenges we've heard about this morning. Science can do a lot, but we need really very good people. You know that resources in this are always limited. And the question is, if we don't know what to do, so how to react? We are speaking that we need people who are flexible, who are creative, but how to achieve that? Are our institutions ready for that? No, I'm sure definitely not our education institutions. not all, in majority, they are not ready. And the point is, who can create, who can help prepare people who are entrepreneurial and so on. If you look to our education system, they are resistant to changes. And even more, if you see how difficult is change the education system, I always say that it's like a ship, the sea boat. If you want to move it, it takes really time. If you make mistake, it takes time again. But what we need now, and we are talking about, is how to be flexible, how to react to needs which are enormous. In 1984, we had 1,000 computers altogether. Now more than 2 billion people are linked to the internet, and maybe even much more today. So we have this system. We have limited resources. And many times, even education, it's part of the political game. You know, you can't make many changes if you want to be elected again and things like that. So, but there is one evidence that the competent teacher who is well qualified and creative himself, he is able to help and educate children that way, even in conditions which are not the best for this kind of activities. So only really creative teacher can do this, and there is a correlation for 15 years old children which says that 75% of their performance is influenced by the teacher. So then also PISA study shows similar things, but there is a study which combines results from PISA and from PIAC. And of course, we know that to reach the competence of teachers, there are two ways: to train them properly, to educate them very well, and also to choose the best people who are really talented for that. And this study also showed that there is a really strong correlation between the wage level, how they are paid, and of course it doesn't go too far. They have quite pragmatic demand, but this is very much also on this. So what we have to do is really, first of all, this would be my first message. We need to stop to speak about importance of teacher. We have to really put it into practice, because only with them we are able to reach the point that we don't lose any talented children to really be developed and work in their life. It's not. The question sometimes is, okay, for future, should we have more university graduates, or do we still need apprenticeships and so on? I think that this is crazy to ask this question. Our question should be, do we do enough to help children to reach the highest level for competency they are able to reach, without that we are decreasing the parameters for that? I think, you know, these new jobs and so on, they will require so many qualified people that we really have to be inclusive and have the best teacher there. So the question also is what to teach, or I think the most important is not only what to teach, but who is teaching that and how to teach. The teacher I am speaking about is the one who is able to motivate children to think independently, to come with new ideas, you know, to work with him, to help him to grow. What's concerning the content, if I have for 1 minute, I will only say, okay. You know, the question is what we should, if we should really support technical and natural sciences. It's on the table every day. Of course, it should be a priority if there is such a big demand and growing demand. comparing the interests of children. So we have to support it. There are some other reasons for that. First of all, we see, and here I use our example, we evaluated some of strategic areas of our economy, and they are short of people because the pool of graduates comparing to jobs descriptions we need actually are more and more missing. So, and I have to say that, okay, we hope all that we will go up in value chain, that we will do more design and services, but even this, which requires creative people, very much needs the content of the subject in which the services are done. So you can have a wonderful PR specialist if he is a good constructor. You can't have it the opposite. So I think we should teach better mathematics, better logic, because since once we lose a child during elementary school, during secondary school, we never keep him back. It's over for him, this big area of future opportunities. And this is very much about the methodology, etc., etc. So I can speak longer. I love this subject, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting what both of you said about teachers, because when I prepared this panel with Corinne Ekman and Eric Charbonnier from the OECD Education Division, they made me this remark, which I had never thought of, but which is really interesting. They told that a young teacher who starts working now and who is 25 will teach to young people who will still be on the job market in 2100. So it's very important to have good teachers, but it's difficult to guess today what a good teacher is for kids who will be working in 2100. Thank you very much. Tyler Cowen, did I pronounce well? You're a very famous author with Average is Over. You were very modest. You didn't want to tell me how many copies you sold, but I know it's a lot. And you also already have 3 careers in one. You're chair of an economic chair at George Mason University in Washington, and you're also the founder of the Marginal Revolution University, which is an online course for economic students and teachers. And from what I understand, you don't believe that we should expect much from government and education for the career of our children, and that they have to find other ways to educate themselves?
The important skill looking forward is the ability to teach yourself new things. The faster technology changes, the more this will matter. The good news is recently we've developed a parallel network called the Internet, which is just great at this. So in this sense, I'm very optimistic. And the government helped found the Internet, so government has played a significant role. But that doesn't mean I'm necessarily optimistic about formal schooling. So think of education, higher education, as doing a bunch of different things. One is it socializes you. It's also fun. People like getting drunk. It's a form of status and signaling and certification. And finally, it's learning. What we've already seen happening is the learning component is much less important. It's more about testing, it's more about certification, it's more about developing contacts, it's more of a mating and marriage market, and it's more about socializing. That doesn't have to be a bad thing, but the learning component of this all has mostly been taken over by the Internet. If I think of my own life, it's a recent project of mine. I want to learn more about the economy of China. So what am I doing? I'm going more to China. I'm speaking more to Chinese economists and journalists, and I read more about China on the Internet. It's what I do. Probably most or all of you are in an analogous position. But the thing we don't do is take this lesson seriously as having something to do with education out there. When it comes to education out there, we like to end with the cliches and the pleas, and it can all be better. And I would say we should try to make it better. I actually think we should try to spend more money on it. But I think the actual honest answer is that when it comes to the learning component of formal schooling, there is no way it can keep up with technology. It cannot come close. It will be exponentially behind. I simply ask you, visit a startup or even a mature company and look at the sense of urgency in that startup. And then visit a school, even a good school, and compare that to the sense of urgency in that school. It's a huge gap. It's not going away. To make it worse, visit the regulator of the school and look at the sense of urgency there compared to the startup, or for that matter, the school. And we're not going to solve this problem. So we need to ask, what can schools do well? A lot of that today actually isn't learning. Schools do a lot of other things. Let's be honest. Now, what concrete changes would I make in schools for them to teach people more things? Well, in the United States, I would have every student who can afford it have to spend at least a year abroad. I would do that. I think there should be many more classes. The idea that you need to take a whole class to learn some topic, it's absurd. Whatever you've learned, it's probably going to be obsolete. A class is to spur your interest. It's to expose you to a new role model, the professor, to a new set of students. We should have way more classes which are way shorter. Some classes should just be 90 minutes long, in my vision of future education. It should be much more like a menu, much more actually like the internet, more about learning, more exposure to variety. Give up the myth that you're like teaching people how to master some topic. You're not. You want to inspire them. It's much more about persuasion, soft skills, liberal arts education, and the humanities will remain important. They're still underrated in a strange way, but they're not mostly about things that people care about. People get their own liberal arts education on the internet. It may be weird, low-status stuff that a lot of us have never heard of, like computer games or celebrities or sports analytics. But I tell you, they are learning statistics through sports, learning the humanities through computer games, learning about tragedy through TV shows, and they are retaining and absorbing this to a phenomenal extent. We are, in some ways, the ones who are behind. So I think formal education needs to wake up, internalize the lessons we all implement in our daily lives. Internet is one of the biggest breakthroughs in education ever. It's here. It doesn't matter whether or not most MOOCs work. That's not the main thing in internet-based education. And we should be realists and realize as part of that, that learning more and more will not go on in standard classrooms. So I'm a funny kind of optimist-pessimist. We live in a great and exciting time when it comes to education. Now we've got to make all those pieces work and fit together. And to do that, we've got to give up a lot of our loyalty to the older models.
Thank you very much. Andrew Bollington, you are the head of the LEGO Foundation. So maybe you want to explain us what the LEGO Foundation is and does. And I wanted to ask after having heard Tyler, whether you think that school should really prepare students to work like in a startup, or should it on the contrary teach more more general attitudes than be prepared to be in very specific professional life?
Thank you. There's a lot that Tyler said there that I'd very much agree with. Let me just try and make it personal for a moment, if I may. A tiny piece of audience participation. Can you just think back to your own school, the last school you went to? I appreciate for some this is many years and for others not quite as many. And I don't know what thoughts are coming into your head. It's probably something, I don't know, the building, maybe the faces of a teacher, the faces of some other children, the friends that were there, these kind of memories. Let me take you to perhaps the thing that is slightly less pleasant and think about the exam room that I think virtually all of us sat in for many hours at the culmination of our school year, and actually probably for several years before we got there. And just think about that exam room for a moment and think about the skills that it's testing, and frankly, the skills that it's rewarding as well. You were successful in that exam room if you demonstrated a real skill to memorize lots of knowledge. And yet the reality, as Tyler just said, is the internet exists these days. That memorization is as if the internet didn't exist. And when I was at school, it didn't, but I wasn't allowed to take books in there either. These days, the internet very much does exist. In that room, the desks were 1.5 meters apart because you weren't allowed to collaborate and work as a team. You had to work individually and independently, and if you did otherwise, it was called cheating. You had to answer a pre-written question in a fixed format, rather than actually managing your own time to achieve a goal or come up with work. And he had to give a right answer to a question that someone else had set, rather than a creative solution to a problem. Actually, when you think about that exam room, the reality is it's testing the exact opposite set of skills that most employers say that they most want and that are most important. And that actually comes back, I think, to the heart of what the Lego Foundation is doing. We often talk about wanting to reimagine learning, because when we listen to panels like this, when we listen to audiences, we hear all this language about creativity, the importance of soft skills, the importance of collaboration, teamwork. The Director General of OECD this morning used the word creativity in his very first sentence. He talked about needing creative minds. In his very last paragraph, he talked about needing creative solutions. And yet we have a school system that in reality says these things that matter, but then we set up a testing system that determines the reality of what's going to happen and sets it in an entirely opposite direction. Of course, the 21st century does have a reality that actually, however good your school, however good your education, what you learned at school is largely irrelevant now from a content perspective. The world has moved on. I did a degree in computer science. The internet didn't actually exist when I did that degree. Can you imagine the relevance of much of that content today? But irrespective of that, of course, what's been discovered since is exploding, and what I need to do my job is also changing. You put those three things together, and I think we actually have a growing gap between what school systems are delivering and what the need says. It's a gap that's actually got bigger in the last 20, 30 years and continues to grow. I could sit here as a pessimist on all of those topics, and yet I think there are some answers. And while I very much agree with Tyler's perspective that there are numerous ways to learn, and perhaps many of them are becoming more important, I also think there is something critical that school systems should be putting a lot more emphasis on than they are today, and that's the importance of lifelong learning. Now, often when we talk about lifelong learning, we only talk about it as though it's a skill relevant for adulthood, as though somehow you've got to get through school, you've got to get through university, you've got to get a degree, and then you can worry about the lifelong learning bit. And yet, I think the reality is that the skills for lifelong learning actually start a lot younger. Now, as Tyler said, we already have an amazing resource and set of facilities out there. There's actually no excuse these days for not being able to lifelong learn. You know, take whatever subject has been almost created or invented since you and I were at school, you know, something to do with neuroscience, something to do with the global economy. There will be resources, there will be materials, there will be MOOCs, there will be experts willing to talk to us and provide us with that information. But of course, the reality is not everyone is out there lifelong learning. If they were, then we wouldn't have had the phrase skill gap used on this panel already. So we've got this irony. The best libraries have now been moved online. We can get them within seconds, but people aren't lifelong learning. Why is that? Well, I think, again, it's something to do with the way that children are learning how to learn. I think in the 21st century, learning how to learn is actually becoming at least as important as the content you learn. The content is going to go out of date, but learning how to learn is the piece that will keep you up to date in the future. How do you need to learn how to learn? Well, first of all, you've got to be motivated to learn. Children have got to leave school motivated and wanting to learn more, rather than just thinking, phew, that's that exam over. To do that, they've got to be still asking questions, their own questions. It's much more interesting to learn about things that interest you, finding out answers to your own questions rather than answering someone else's question in an exam. You've got to have the skills to relate the content to real life. You've got to be able to stick at a problem, stick at a challenge, even when the going gets a bit tough. You've got to have an attitude of being willing to try and fail and try again, rather than to treat failure as a cross on the exam paper and a negative mark. You've got to be able to network and communicate with others, certainly these days virtually, in practice also across cultures. You've got to be able to critically analyze and evaluate the information you find on the internet, not just memorize it. And I'd say you've got to be able to play creatively with ideas and solutions. These aren't skills that you learn just as an adult. I think the reality is they're set down in a process of education that actually starts in the kindergarten. The reality is a 4 or 5-year-old, those of you who've got children or grandchildren, know that the one thing that tends to annoy us all is they spend their life saying, why? There's a natural inquiry. They want to learn about the world. They're constantly asking why. In education, we call that inquiry. It's the very basis of learning. Yet actually what a lot of education systems do these days is stamp that out. Not interested in the child's question of why, we're interested in taking the national curriculum and telling them that's the answer. So learning by asking questions really is fundamental. I believe that starts in the kindergarten, and it's something we should be nurturing right the way through the school system to develop those skills of lifelong learning. So in the 21st century, how you learn really is as important as what you learn. And it's therefore time for us to look much more critically at national education systems, look at the sheer weight of the national curriculum. Never, I believe, has a national curriculum been revised in a country and made thinner. We tend to add more and more content as though somehow one day we'll be able to get all of the internet into the national curriculum. It's time to actually step back from that vicious cycle and actually create a bit more space there to focus on the skills that allow children to become lifelong learners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a few remarks on WeSamply from the audience that are quite interesting. You know, one of our someone in the public says you're rather critical on contemporary universities. Do any panelists plan on not sending their children to them? So what? You're very critical on, you know, traditional education, but what would you do for your children? Is there an alternative?
We sent our daughter, but I would stress this notion: universities do a bunch of things. They certify, they teach people social norms, and they're a mating market, and those are important gains, and you get connections for your future employment opportunities. Those don't actually have that much to do with learning. So to teach your child how to learn on his or her own and send them to a good university where they'll get these other benefits, that's the way to think about it. If you're trying to evaluate the university in terms of how well it will teach your kid, I would say that's a big mistake, but you've got to send your kid to a good school if you can afford it.
I agree that Tyler, that there is rising concerns among policymakers and analysts in education that change in education is much slower compared to change in technologies. But at the same time, I think we have a huge upward potential for educational changes. So if you have strong leadership that can utilize the technologies that Tyler mentioned and new pedagogies that Andrew mentioned, we combine them, then we can really make a big change. So I'm rather optimistic about the future changes, although so far the speed of change is slow, but maybe in the future the change in education could be explosive. And I, as a policymaker, before the Meister initiative, when I made several visits to the failing vocational high schools, I saw their eyes without any hopes. I mean, they are regarded as a secondary school students with nothing, I mean, with kind of dead-end careers and so forth. But after Meister high schools, when I saw their eyes with full of hopes, confidence, they are not just, I mean, taking lessons on specific skills, but they are actually having learned about the new attitudes toward the life. So I mean, and they are also making friends. They are enjoying their life in new types of schools. So I mean, I agree that the things that should be learned in school should be changed radically. But if you can change that, you can change the life of children. So I mean, but the practically, it's really hard to make a conscious change in education because I mean, political interests are always lie in the short-run interests. So the long-run based education change is not actually the norm in politics. But if you have a crisis can be utilized as a leverage to have an opportunity to make a new change, right? So if the crisis level has been escalated to a certain level, maybe there could be explosive changes in education. Nobody knows. And if you are well prepared, like OECD, I mean the institution can have a lot of research on new pedagogies and new technologies in education, and it's well prepared, then some opportunity came up, then we can have explosive changes in Korea or in Czechoslovakia or in France, and then other countries can follow up. So I mean, I'm expecting that kind of optimistic changes in education.
Maybe just shortly, it depends very much on expectations of young people, what they expect for their lives. So accordingly, they should choose the university. But, those who are really gifted and who have the ambitions and whom we need to make the science, to make the research, to go really ahead, to discover things and so on, to help to eliminate diseases whatsoever. So they have the platform in universities. And the task for ministers or other politicians is to let the academic world to also feel the pressure of the whole world and their key role in it, to understand that it's not easy life to be in the university. It's something which lets them to have in their hands the lives of future generations.
You all stressed that it was an interesting point of view to make businesses and education system closer and have cooperations between the two to prepare the kids for tomorrow. But we don't even know what kind of skills will be needed in 15 years' time, what kind of job companies will need. So is it such a good idea to join the two and to have a strong cooperations between the two?
I think almost everyone will need to know some managing, looking forward, and how to work with people in a team, and just a sense of how private businesses operate. One distressing trend in America, I find, is that employment of teenagers has been going down for several decades. And one of the best educations you can get is to actually, as a 16-year-old, have to work somewhere for 6 months. It's amazing what you learn, and it's things you're never told in school. So overall, I think there should be more ways to get credit for doing something with the private sector.
I think for me, the issue comes back to shifting this emphasis of content. And I think too often it's easy for the private sector to think it wants to get involved in education with some skills-based agenda around, I need more employers who have got a specific technical skill, HTML or something. I think when that's the agenda, frankly, it's pushing in the wrong direction. And that kind of skill-based short-termism isn't really what's going to change our system. What is when we shift the emphasis back onto some broad underlying skills that I think will provide some long-term confidence that they are the skills that will allow children becoming adults to constantly adapt and change, work in teams, work collaboratively, work in ways that are creative, that solve problems, and so on. I think there's a group of skills relating to this. If I could just link it to the last question, actually, I think the reality is there's some great universities out there doing some phenomenal teaching, and then of course there are some lousy universities out there doing some lousy teaching. Where does the difference come from? Well, I think in the 21st century, if your reason for going to university is just to learn the content of the degree, then frankly log on to the internet and start reading. There's nothing that universities have got that's somehow hidden or unknown to the rest of us. I think what matters is the way in which you start to learn and the way in which you engage there. I love the example that comes from the MIT Media Lab, who we work with. They talk about the 4 Ps that underpin all of their work. They first of all work through projects because they believe that when people are working in projects, they can apply that to real life, often with a business sponsor or something, so that it's got a real life application. They talk about passion because people need to be really engaged and believing in what they learn. They talk about peers because you need to be working with other people, working in a team, benefiting. And they talk about play because play is one of the ways in which we play with ideas. When we're in a playful state of mind, we often become more creative. Rather than saying something is wrong, it becomes an opportunity to try something else. So I think those 4 Ps for me are a good reason for going to university. Learning a bit of content along the way is, of course, great as well, and no reason not to do that. But let's not put the content ahead of the way in which you actually learn, because one is what's going to give you the survival to still have relevant skills in the 22nd century.
If we named the competence which is needed, which should be developed, or skills, it's of course languages, IT, the knowledge how to learn. It's definitely the right, and also then some technical or other specialist subject knowledge. But the point also is, and it was more or less mentioned by my colleagues, all of them, that we are facing the new age for education. You know, we are still teaching our kids as like in industrial age, but they are born in the mouse with their hand, now even without the mouse, somebody told me. Well, and there is another thing which I think is important, and we have to help children to understand the world. And I will, to have the self-confidence, to feel motivated, to have ambitious and to really go. And if you allow me a little story, it's about farmer who one day found an egg in his court. So he took it and put it under the hen. And some time later, a little eagle was born. And he grew in this court, he had enough to eat, he was happy, they liked him, chicken liked him. And one day, when he already grew a little bit, he looked to the sky, and he saw a beautiful bird. And he asked a hen next to him, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, you don't know that? This is an eagle, it's a king of birds." And the eagle said, "It's beautiful." And then he continued to live in this court and grow, and he was older, and he died. And he died as a hen because he thought he's a hen.
Okay, thank you, Meta. So we should raise eagle rather than chicken. We have time for a few questions in the room. If you haven't already asked them on Assembly, please. I think if you speak loud, maybe. You will. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that at the beginning. We have two panels, actually. The first one on education with the four first speakers, and then for the second part of the session, we'll have another panel on job quality, and that's when you will hear our three other speakers, and we will have obviously time for questions for them too as well, and they can also interact with each other at the end of the session. Did you have another question? If you make it short.
It's very simple. My name is Chris Coles. I'm really going to speak just to the young people here. When I left school, I got my education from where I worked. It seems to be a lost concept today. Kids are given cheap, lousy jobs with no educational prospects whatever from them. And that is the result of inadequate investment in jobs. And it's let generation after generation down. I would recommend that some of you go and read the life history of Charles Dickens and find out how he learned to be a novelist, because the same process would work for almost any occupation you like. He didn't go out to become a novelist. He learned how to do it through work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a good transition to the second panel on quality job, actually. But maybe just before I'll take another question, either from the room, either from Assembly. There's someone here? Yeah. Please, thank you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Joseph Tixier, and I work in the field of education development and entrepreneurial education development. One of the questions, that the sentence of Edu was really interesting to know that the teachers are educating pupils that will be in the job market in 100 years, I mean in 2100. So the question is, how do you measure the impact of such novel education approaches? Because it has been a raised issue from governments and policymakers. How do you measure this impact, and should we even measure this impact?
I think, Tyler, you had a quite controversial paper on your blog on that subject, on the link between, education and growth.
If you look at which countries have grown the most, it's striking how uncorrelated it is with education. So if you look at China, which has had a 10% growth rate for almost 35 years, in terms of education as a fraction of GDP, China is quite low. For a lot of its recent history, it was behind Kenya. It's still behind Mexico. There are parts of Latin America and the Middle East which spend a lot on education and tend to do very badly, economically speaking. So human capital is the key. It's not education. Culture matters, peer effects matter, but we don't understand education very well, is a point I would stress. And there's some magic about a lot of things coming together. You see it in Silicon Valley. You see it in Berlin. I would say you see it in contemporary Korean culture, but maybe not because of their formal education. And that kind of magic is what we need to understand better.
Yeah.
And so how could we measure?
Yes, the measurement is really a tricky issue, but I still believe that although we don't have enough good measures, but we are actually have better and better measures. I mean, we used to rely on years of schooling and so forth, but now we do have PISA test. But PISA test is not a correct measure to include, for example, cognitive skills like communication and creativity skills and so forth. So we are trying to find out different kind of measures like a PIAC test. So I mean, although the current measurement is not enough, but we still should try to get a better measurement. I mean, in every other area we are trying to get better measurement. So in addition to that, I really like to emphasize the Korean experience. Korea has made a great success both in economic growth and political democratization together. And there has been a consensus among policymakers and people in general that it's mainly due to educational factors. I mean, because Korea once was the country with the least educational level, but now we have attained educational level which is the highest in the world, and that measurement, statistics masks some problems, what I call education bubbles and so forth. But still, in the long run, I mean, what Korea has achieved is mainly thanks to educational development.
Thank you. We're going to move to the second panel, but before that, I think you should see on the screen a short question to answer a poll. So I think you have a device on an app on Weassembly to answer the poll. So the question is, in order to prepare for the workforce, should young people specialize early, or are they better off seeking a more general education? So you can choose either 1, specialized, or 2, general education. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to ask a last question from Weassembly, and just for a short answer, someone asked whether, if any country has made an experience of spreading learning periods over a lifetime, spreading learning period along lifetime instead of doing all when you're, under 25 or 20.
The whole world does this now. On any given day, more people are reading economics blogs than are taking principles of economics. So we've done this, and it seems to be working.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move to our second panel, because what would this all these education discussions be worth if it doesn't, turn into quality jobs? So, and also it's, sometimes I wonder if it's not an oxymoron to say that, young people will have 20 jobs in their lifetime and will have quality job. We don't really know what quality jobs are. There are different definitions, but the one that the OECD is working on stresses that a quality job is also a job where you have security, where you feel secure. Can you feel secure if you have to change 20 times in your lifetime? So to address this subject, I will first ask Bill Spriggs to tell us his definition of a quality job and to see how he sees it. Bill is the chief economist of AFL-CIO, which is, as you probably all know, the main trade unions in the United States. Bill, what do you think is a quality job? And do you think that with this new economic model, young people and even people who are today in the workforce can go on having quality jobs?
Well, I think that's the key issue, and the reality, I think, is no. We've actually lived in this world for a good 20 years already, and so far it hasn't produced quality jobs. It hasn't produced wage increases. If you look at the reality for young people in the OECD countries, we suffered the largest downturn in jobs for them. And so for people under 25, the share who were employed plummeted to levels that we've never seen before, and they haven't really recovered very well. So we continue to see for young people, not just the lack of quality jobs, but the lack of jobs. In the United States, this graduating class is finally getting close to matching their education to the job opportunities that are available to them, as opposed to the underemployment that we saw throughout most of the recovery, where highly educated workers were taking very low-skilled jobs, jobs where the predominant share of workers had less education. So one key thing is we still have to get back to full employment, and for this generation, this current generation, that is still the #1 imperative. When you look at wages in the United States as an example, college-educated workers, their starting wages have still continued to decline since 2000, not since the downturn that exacerbated the downturn that we were seeing from 2000, but since 2000, the wages of new college graduates have actually been on the decline. So this is across the board. For those who have less education, of course, it's gone down as well. The one thing that college-educated workers in the US can say is we're doing better because our wages aren't declining as much as those with a high school degree. We have seen the new model of 20 jobs in a lifetime convert to jobs that are precarious in very many different ways, flexible, often not from the perspective of the worker, but flexible from the perspective of the employer. So the employer thinks, this is great, I have a flexible workforce, but for workers it creates uncertainty, and it has outstripped our current labor regulations. Most of our labor regulations imagine that workers might, in fact, be with a steady employer, but these contingent workforces, which are growing in the OECD, and are at very high rates in the US and now in Japan. Well, these contingent jobs often have a component which is very close to the worker being on call. Because of the flexibility demanded of the employer, we're seeing that workers can't schedule themselves, and ironically, while it looks like, oh, this is great, you're working 20 hours, you could have many jobs. No, because your employer thinks that all 40 hours of the week belong to them. We're just choosing the 20 where you're going to show up. So these types of abuses are not being addressed because our labor regulations are behind that. We see in Japan, in fact, that they're trying to roll back on the protections of overtime pay for their workers, which is a huge abuse we see in the United States, and that's one reason the US was trying to bring its overtime rules back up to accommodate what we see in the workforce for workers who are quote unquote supposed to be highly skilled, but are in fact low paid. So store managers find themselves being paid $26,000 a year at some of our stores, which is just above the poverty level in the United States for a family of four, but they are not qualified for overtime. And many of them find themselves working 60 and 70 and 80 hours with no extra compensation. So I would say currently we are not generating that. Sure, you can point to one person or two people or some successes, some great entrepreneur who's come out with a great new idea about how to hire other people, taking advantage of this very system that exacerbates it. But the pattern, what is happening to the typical educated worker, isn't showing a reward to this kind of flexibility. And if what we mean by a good job, decent job, is at least security to keep your human capital and keep the gains in your human capital, that's the other dimension that we see missing. During this downturn, I mean, we talk about lifelong learning, but during this downturn, companies have already adapted to big data. So when you submit your application, this becomes a big data question for companies. We know that mechanically, firms were dismissing anyone who said they had been unemployed more than 6 months. If there was a 6-month gap in your resume, you were automatically rejected. So even if you were wonderful at lifelong learning, we'll never know because you were just totally eliminated. And we find that companies, because they take these workers in a high unemployment environment, do in fact tend towards what the panel was warning against, which is, do you have this specific skill? Not are you presenting to me a set of experiences and a set of life experiences that show me that you could learn or you could adapt to my workplace. It becomes, no, I want this skill. We had the absurdity of one company asking 8 years of experience in a programming language that was 2 years old. So this is the type of thing that you see creep into the system when you have high levels of unemployment and, in fact, a very highly skilled workforce, but a workforce that cannot have the opportunity to learn. When companies kept workers, then workers could learn on the job, could demonstrate their ability, and had the ladder to move up. The fragmentation of the workforce, meaning that core workers are here, beginning and entry workers are over here, actually working for a different company, even if they're in the same building, even if they seem to be working on the same set of projects, means that I don't get to celebrate that lifelong learning. Now, we addressed that at the AFL-CIO, which is one of the gaps that's also missing here, because in places where we have apprenticeships, whether it's in aerospace or automobiles or in building and construction, we train more workers than anyone else in the United States except the United States military. But those workers have an agreement with that industry, both for what is being taught, how to keep up with the industry, and how to keep those skills. Those workers do have to do lifelong learning. Their jobs change tremendously. You can imagine an electrician from 20 or 35 years ago, the way in which their job has transformed in that 35-year period and the type of training they must undergo to keep it. But that's because the firms have made a commitment. And so there's a commitment both between workers and the firms, but that means you have to have organized workers. And what we know is taking place across the OECD are attacks on the ability of workers to organize. And without having workers organized and at the table so that we can share in how do we go about this training process, and without the commitment to those workers, it's going to be very hard for the current system as it's configured to duplicate what would be a solid, steady job. And as a result, over the last 30 years, wages have been fairly flat in the OECD. We've seen productivity continue to increase, and there's a huge gap in the OECD nations between the increase in productivity and the wages of workers. And as long as that continues, firms aren't going to step to the plate. And as long as they think I can dispose of workers and think of them as they're going to have 20 jobs, we're not going to see them make the commitment, the investment to do the training on the job and let you learn, as the speaker brought up before, let you learn on the job and learn all that you could do. So I would say no. Currently, the track record over the last 30 years, and definitely if we say, well, it's only since the internet age, if we only go from 1995, if we just say the last 20 years, we simply have not changed the equation enough to reward workers, to make the investment, to see employers make the commitment and the workers to continue to make that investment, or to engage the workforce, an organized workforce, and set up the institutions that can address that. And we have not seen our labor regulations keep up with what have ended up being more abusive than successful models. The abusive models outweigh the successful models in terms of engaging the current workforce.
Thank you very much. Alan Pal, you are president of the European Youth Forum. And you probably share with Mr. Spriggs this disappointment on quality job, because we're seeing a paradox in Europe where we've never had such a high level of education for young people and such a high level of unemployment for young people as well. So do you see do you see how we could reconcile the promise of high education and good job, and how do you see improvement in the future?
Well, thank you very much. You're absolutely right. I do fully share those concerns. We see that picture to be quite a lot the same in Europe, all across Europe. But what is rather interesting, but of course in a very negative way, is that there are many, if we compare young people entering the labor market today with young people entering the labor market like decades in the past, there is a clear trend that also in relation to already more experienced workers in the labor market, the youth wages are also lower. So there are inequalities that are increasing. So it's more difficult to get a first job because there are higher expectations, or there simply are no jobs, etc., while at the same time you're being offered less. So this seems to be a trend all across Europe. We also focus a lot about unemployment figures. We say that, okay, there are 50% of young people unemployed in countries like Spain, etc. But what we often don't think about is that, okay, this is one figure, one economic indicator, but indeed we don't often look at, so what are the working conditions for those young people that are employed, or what are or who actually falls out of the picture, because the unemployment statistics only concern the active population. So those who are in education or training or have a job, whereas we are talking about more young people in Europe are not at all present anywhere, so they've almost fallen off the radar than there are unemployed young people. So we're talking about 5 million unemployed young people and more than 7 million what are called NEETs. So we're seeing that these kind of problems are an indication of a structural problem in the labor market itself. And we hear a lot that, okay, we need to focus on the skills. Young people are not finding jobs because they don't have the particular skills. And yes, there is an element of skills mismatching, but only that would only alleviate one of the 6 young people that are looking for jobs if we manage to kind of do that bridging. So there is an enormous challenge for us. Then when we look at the cost of things, the Eurofound has calculated that for those young people that are not at all in the labor market or in education and training, the cost of that, economic cost for EU, is around 150 billion euros each year. And it would cost something like 20 to 50 billion euros to have labor market intervention measures to try to bring them back to the labor market. Whom we are often talking about are young people that are low skilled or come from poor socioeconomic backgrounds. And that is also correlation. So if we go to the question of what is a quality job, we often face, I often also face the question of, so who is a young person anyway? And for us, the concept is about transition, you know, into an autonomous life. But you cannot have an autonomous life if you don't have income. It's a very basic question. And we're seeing that for us, of course, that is a key issue when it comes to quality of a job, of course, but there are many other things. There is indeed a question of security in the long term, but there is also a question of a good working environment. Is the working environment discrimination-free? If I come from a background which is from a minority, do I have access at the same level as anyone else would from the majority to the labor market? And I think these are all the kind of questions that we don't often talk about in the labor market context, and for us are part of this quality issue. And of course, a good skills mismatch is important. We see that because of the structural problems, of course, we're not creating enough jobs. So we need to invest into the economy. So I think the gentleman over there who was voicing an opinion, that's a key issue. We're not, however well we organize the educational systems, if you don't have good macroeconomic policies, it's just one side of the coin. So we absolutely need to address that as well. But maybe trying to bridge those issues a bit further, of the education and the jobs. I think that one of the things that we didn't really, or what I didn't really hear, but what I've been thinking about a lot in terms of what the future of learning will look like. And it is true that educational institutions do not have a monopoly on the learning. It happens everywhere, in all places. But what I think will be a fundamental game changer is that what is the organ that actually decides quite about our bodies and how our brains function is, well, the brain itself. We don't know that much about it. And I think the future of learning will be very much correlated to how much we will be able to learn about our own brains and body function, how they correlate, and how thus then we develop new skills. So I think that will be probably in a far distant side of learning. But the question still remains that a lot of the jobs, because of this technological development and automation, will disappear. And if we don't invest in job creation, I think we're not creating the opportunities, not only for young people, but it will be a question for wider population increasingly.
Thank you very much. I now give maybe we can have a look on the Assembly poll. I think we have the answer. Do you see it? So, well, it's really clear majority for general education rather than specialization at this stage. Well, thank you very much for your participation in the poll. Now let's listen to our last speaker. We kept him for the end of the session because he's a kind of a mutant. He's the example of maybe of this new job market and the way young people will have to adapt. He did studies, Michel Visser, which have nothing to do with his actual job, which he will present himself. He is the founder of a startup. Michel?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, I'm a founder of a startup called Connected. We are building a website where we connect students with teachers locally, and anybody can be a student. Because we think that all the knowledge you need to develop yourselves resides in the people around you. And if we start sharing our knowledge, we can make our neighborhoods our own universities. And indeed, I didn't study entrepreneurship myself. I'm an actor studied theater at a drama school in Arnhem in the Netherlands. And I had to educate myself, as mentioned before, and learn and study myself via peers to actually become an entrepreneur and fail a lot. So if we talk about quality jobs of the future, I think it's really difficult to say what jobs are there in the future. and what the jobs will be and what kind of competence we need for the jobs in the future. So I think then it gets back to education again, and that we need to empower people, empower employees to have the skills they need to actually be flexible in a flexible job market. So one of the things I always emphasize, being an entrepreneur myself, is that we need to learn how to fail and to do failure a lot, as said before in the panel as well. Which is actually you learn at drama school as well to fail a lot, because you learn quick to about yourself. So, for example, our schools, our universities are built upon a foundation of an old foundation where we need to score, where we need to get higher scores, and so we train people to become the best and not to fail a lot. So I would really like to see that within our current systems, but also outside our current system, we should focus a more on teaching kids to fail and to actually celebrate failure, to learn quicker on how they should develop themselves, and to have the skills to actually be flexible and resilient in a job market where right now the employers are the boss. So to actually empower people and employees to be more resilient in the new job market, one of the skills we need to develop is failure.
And can you give us your definition, Michel, of what a quality jobs would be in today in the world of startups and entrepreneurship?
Well, as I said, I think a quality job is one where you how did I write it down? Let me shortly look. Is where we empower people and to actually to be owner of their own future, and not be guided by employers and people who tell you what job you're gonna do, but that you are able to actually own your own future and own your own education, so that you decide what you are gonna do next and what you are willing to develop yourself in. I think that's a quality job where employers empower people to actually become what they want to become, and let them grow within as a person and as a being.
And can you remind us what's the name of your company and your website?
It's connected.com with two Ks, and yeah, that's a website, for example, where freelancers, if they want to build their own website, they go to Connected and they say, I need to build my own website. I have no clue about how to do it. Is they search for people to help them actually learn how to build WordPress websites, for example, and they find someone in their neighborhood and they're sitting together every week to learn about building WordPress websites. So they empower themselves to become micro entrepreneurs and grow their possibilities.
I have a question for you, following what Alan presented. What is how do wages compare in startups in Europe compared to employment in big companies or small businesses, which would not be startups?
I think there's a huge difference between the U.S. market and the European market, as well as in U.S. Developers and people who can code earn a lot more money than people who can code in the Netherlands can. So I think yeah, we have in startups there's passion involved. There's people trying to pursue a dream, and they are willing to work 60+ hours to build and have impact in society. And I think that comes with a low wage as well, and we will in the future maybe earn more money, but we invest in the company and bootstrap as far as possible and iterate as much as possible to get where we want to be because we are passionate about it.
And from your experience, is it something that everyone can do, become an entrepreneur and accept living on a very low wage, or not very low wage, but on a lower wage than in a big corporation, especially in big cities where renting and accommodation is expensive?
I think that we'll see an increase of micro entrepreneurship as we already see it right now. Is that people in Paris? I came here with Uber Pop this morning. Maybe some people don't like that, but yeah, these are micro entrepreneurs in a sense, and people earning a little extra money via Airbnb by renting out their own apartment. And actually enabling them to invest in their own education or in their own new startup. So I think we see an increase of in a flexible job market where people take ownership of their own future, earn a little extra money via several jobs, and actually invest in their own future.
Alan, do you think this is part of the solution? What is your point of view on these?
Part of it, for sure. But the challenge is, will this create employment for a vast majority of people? I think that would be a challenge. There's a lot of entrepreneurship happening, and we need to foster that more. Indeed, it's very difficult for a lot of young people to get access to credit, first of all. There's questions about social security, etc. So many young people would put it off because of those issues. Whereas, but I think it's still, in terms of job creation, not filling the gaps. And thus, the structural problems of unemployment or underemployment or unpaid internships continue. And I think for our social models, that's just not viable. We need to have solutions for everybody, not just for some segment. But definitely, we should encourage economic development. And of course, we don't know what the future will look like. And there is a question of needing to upskill as well. So future is digital. We need basically everybody in the future to know coding as we know English today to be able to live in the global world. So I think there are a lot of kind of challenges and opportunities there, but the goal should be to create employment for all.
Do you think that the government are enough aware of, well, they are obviously enough aware of this, but are searching actively for solutions and new models to address this problem of quality job? Because, you know, if the digital revolution goes on, the robotization, artificial intelligence, I think the job market is not going to improve. So do you think there is enough solutions on the table?
Well, I think the challenge really is that young people are kind of often at the edges when it comes to political decision making. And their interests are not always at the heart. Yet just today here, one participant told me that, okay, talking about pensions, that often you get a lot of people who have direct interest in getting pensions quite soon in their lives, advocating for solutions and participating in the decision making. But the young people who would be most affected for the most longest period are not often present in those discussions. So basically, you're not included and you kind of lose out in this game politically. So I think that is the greatest challenge, is to actually also, when we talk about education, is to ask maybe the children to participate more in their own, creating their own educational pathways. It's often like, I think we talk a lot about young people and children, but it's often quite tokenistic. Young people are some sort of objects somewhere to be dealt with. So in that perspective, I don't think that our governments are really centering their policies on this generation. And that, I think, reflects also that young people then are less likely to vote, for example. They don't want to engage with that kind of politics because they don't see a role there. And this is something we need to turn around as well. And I think we have opportunities to do that with new ways how young people are actually engaging in society. So I think we will also see some changes in the decision making as well.
Bill, do you think this question of quality job and lifelong training, which is not provided anymore but a lifelong employer, will be discussed during the campaign in the United States? And do you see interesting proposals on the table, or not yet?
all of the candidates of both parties are engaging on inequality because they understand, because in the U.S., inequality, income inequality and wealth inequality are on par with where we were going into the Great Depression, not the recession, the Great Depression. And that's intolerable. It's not going to work from a democratic point of view. It doesn't work from a micro foundations of macro policy, because you can't do meaningful stimulus if 80% of the people don't have any money. So it creates real problems. Is it going to be an equal conversation? Well, so far, one of our parties, the Republican Party in a number of our states, have been busy attacking labor standards and labor unions. So that they are far from the solution, in my view. And so I hope that we do have an election where we do get to have a clear referendum on the path that we would go. But this needs to be within the European Union as well. What we see is that austerity has failed. This idea that the unemployment of young people is free, as you just heard, unemployment is not free. This is a real opportunity cost to our nations. We are reducing, permanently reducing our potential output. It's not just the hundreds of billions of dollars that it costs today, but it's going forward compounding the loss of that capacity. And so this idea that austerity and giving small space for fiscal response to the crises is somehow another good, well, that idea has failed. And hopefully there can be more consensus in the EU on addressing this. And clearly in thinking about the problems in Greece, the need for fiscal space has to be created. And hopefully the debate with Greece will highlight that and crystallize it and make people understand that more austerity is not the solution. So that has to be key, not just within the U.S. elections, but it has to be a key element here in Europe. The U.S. growth in the first quarter was down because the dollar has appreciated versus the euro, and that hurt our balance of trade, which was a contribution to our downturn. So, I mean, within the OECD, we need to coordinate. A great thing about the OECD is it gives us space for us to talk about the need to coordinate these. But it's young people in all of our countries who continue to suffer from this misguided belief in austerity and this weird accounting, which is not national accounting. National accounting would say the 130-some billion, the 500 billion in the U.S. that unemployment is costing us have to be on the table. Instead, they're looking at a GDP fiscal gap. You have to look at how much this unemployment gap is costing, and without that, that's not true national accounting. So these kind of changes have to take place. It will be something we will crystallize, we hope, from our participation from the AFL-CIO's perspective within the U.S. election, but it needs to be a global conversation.
Thank you very much. I have a sign that time is up, so I just share with you a few last comments from WeAssembly. So we have one participant saying that aging population mean more people will leave market than join. What can we do to create quality job for older workers? We'll maybe have to work longer. And another question is about, what about multi-jobs models? Be employed 3 days a week, plus be an entrepreneur, volunteer, family organizer. So we see that there are many other proposals that could be explored, but I think OECD will have to organize another session. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you to our panelists for their very interesting interventions.